Hi, everyone. Welcome to our second bonus episode of Lights Camera Accolade. Today, we're going to be answering all of our frequently asked questions that we got from listeners. So, pretty much, if even one person asked a question, we're going to be answering it here today. So, we're going to start with just some really basic things that we realize we haven't gone over in general. So, we can get started with our film history section.
So, film history, kind of a big question here. This, in a way, is the most fundamental topic on offer. So, Chrysanth, I hope you're ready. But we have a couple of really useful questions from our audience members here, just related to film in general. Who invented film, and where did the idea for film come from?
Great question, listener. It wasn't just one person. It was multiple people who got obviously invested in trying to perfect a photo or a picture in motion. It originated from existing like photography. A lot of, I don't want to say people who were known as filmmakers, but a lot of people who were in that space of like photography, film, and all that were already, either rich and inventors and were just, looking for money to, market themselves and get more rich, or they already had like interest in photography. So it stemmed from wanting like capturing motion and having a fascination with the persistence of vision. So what was it like in the early, 19th century? So around 1830s, they had the zoetropes, which we had mentioned in a previous episode.
They were that early?
Yeah. So if you don't know what a zoetrope is, it looks kind of like a lampshade, and there's a light. I don't know if it shines through it or within it, but you spin kind of that lampshade thing, and it has pictures, and each kind of like frame of the picture has a different, I guess, movement or kind of like a change. So when you spin it around and you watch it, it'll look like your picture is moving. You can see it. A lot of artists do it with like flip books where they do little comics. And that's what, I don't want to say movies were, because at the time that really wasn't a term that was coined, but that's what people were used to. And so it was just kind of like the idea of building more off of that. So the idea originates with early photography. And then obviously we move into the 70s or even 80s up until like 95. And so a lot of people credit the Lumiere brothers for inventing cinema or movies or the camera.
I kind of wonder, going back like the zoetrope, I wonder how much of wanting to expand that to a big screen where multiple people could see just came from how inefficient it was to try and be like crowded around like one. So like, was this a little sibling just be like, it's my turn, and eventually they're like, you know what, I'm going to invent film. You're hogging it.
That's a really good segue. So before, I guess, like a camera was invented, the kinetoscope was invented by Thomas Edison and William Dickinson. And so they developed that in the US in 1894. And so that was not really like a zoetrope, but kind of similar, where it was only one person can view. So kind of like a camera obscura. So it's kind of like that. And so a kinetoscope was essentially a box, and you had a little viewer inside that you would peer into it.
I've seen that.
And the light would project, and you would be able to see, like just a couple of seconds of a picture moving, and that's it. And the funny thing though is that like before Edison had made the kinetoscope, he had like another attempt at creating, I guess, a movie that was an utter failure. I forget what it was called, but it used kind of similar to his other invention with like his phonograph with that like big wax cylinder. He tried to do the same thing using microphotographs on that same cylinder, but it just wasn't the same. And then that's when the whole like kinetoscope became a thing. But it's funny because he actually got that idea or that inspiration from another inventor it was some kind of like European,
like at a World's Fair.
Yes.
Sort of
and yeah. And the name of it, I cannot pronounce for the life of me. It's like Athénée Jules Mary or something like that in a Paris exposition in 1889 was what he got influenced by, whatever they were doing. And then kind of like typical Edison fashion, kind of took the idea.
Yeah, he's like, I'm gonna steal that.
Yeah, and then ran with it himself.
Yeah.
And then that's how it shifted to like film technology. And so since when he created that kinetoscope, it influenced other people who were kind of in the same sphere, you know, with inspiring competition. And so there were like other people trying to do the same thing. And
off of that, the first honorary inductee to the Academy, Thomas Edison,
of
posthumously.
Course. And
of course.
He was also the reason that people mostly had to move to Hollywood, because he had such like a stranglehold on the film industry in New York that many filmmakers had to go out west. It's kind of annoying that he was in, like, yes, he was very pivotal, but he also was a huge problem in a lot of ways, you know? So it's kind of like, okay.
Yeah,
Ruthless.
reading this, it sounds like he just kind of got into it for the novelty, but also like the prospect of making money. Because since, you know, like, I don't know, I don't like Edison.
Yeah, me neither. I probably don't know enough about him to make that, you know, judgment call fully. But from the little bit I know, I'm just like, man, he seems like the type of person who stifles creativity from others once he steals their idea and then tries to build an empire off of it. And it's like, wow.
There were obviously like other inventors kind of getting in on the whole like camera motion picture stuff. And then like there was one in, was it Germany? His name was William Fries Green. Oh no, sorry. He was in Britain. So like he had kind of like the earliest model of a motion picture camera, and he used the help of a civil engineer, you know, obviously to create it. But he came to a roadblock because they couldn't solve the projection challenge, and that kind of halted that. And then obviously with the kinetoscope, when that became a thing, it kind of like stole that thunder. And then the Lumieres came into the picture with their cinematography or tography, how I don't know how to pronounce it. And that was debuted in 1895. And that same year was that kind of like the first year that an actual kind of like motion picture was screened using their technology. And it ran at 15 frames per second.
Wow.
With a 50-second film capacity. So very innovative at the time.
You
Yeah.
know what it reminds me of, Chrysantha, as you're describing these different parties all kind of working towards the same eventuality and almost kind of like an arms race situation. It reminds me of that movie Oppenheimer that came out last year, where it was like, word got out that this is technically possible or feasible, and it became a matter of who's going to get to it first. At least that's what it sounds like to me.
Yeah, that's what I find like with a lot of like inventions or just in general like novelty things. It's always a race for everything. I mean, we're seeing it now with AI. You know, one company comes up with it, and then other people are like jumping on it, trying to make it better or implement it in their stuff. Even with like search engines or the internet. I mean, there was Ask Jeeves at one time. There was
Oh, I remember
Yahoo
him.
search and MSN search, and then Google just came and took over everything. And then, you know, it's crazy.
And then Bing tried to come through and be like, no, let's have alternatives. And everyone was like, no.
We don't even have like singularly evil figures like Thomas Edison anymore. We just have faceless corporations.
Well, a completely unrelated side note, even like with search engines too, like the whole reason why we have image search now is because of J-Lo's revealing dress that she wore to the Oscars or Grammys or whatever the hell. And people wanted to see it. So then Google's like,
that's
what?
why?
Yeah, that's exactly why
it's J-Lo.
Yeah, because the search engine.
Yep, it's all because of J-Lo, which if you then trace it back is technically because of Selena, because J-Lo wouldn't have been famous if she hadn't played her in the biopic. So really, we have Tejano star Selena to thank for Google Images.
I feel like we're skirting on some deep like cultural controversy here that I'm not privy to. Like runs deep with two of our hosts, and the other one's just like, I like J-Lo.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Fun.
Yeah, it's a very common thing to see like among like, I guess, inventions or just new technology emerging, is there's always people trying to come in and I wouldn't say one up each other, maybe one up each other, but
Yeah.
also just trying to like
Depends
perfect
who.
it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, that was really enlightening. Yeah. Um, so more specifically, Chrysantha, what was the first movie that was ever made, and who was involved in that?
So the first movie again is another a hot topic or a debated topic because you have like at the time obviously like they didn't have the same definitions of movie that we do. So if you're talking about it in a sense of like the first photographic motion sequence, that would be The Horse in Motion that was released in
Yeah.
1878 by Edward
Early?
Muybridge. And that consisted of just a short moving picture. It used 12 cameras along a track to capture a horse's gait.
Mhm.
And they were just photographs that were displayed in sequence to create the illusion of motion. So similar to kind of like how a zoetrope works or like a flip book. And so that would be kind of considered a movie if you're looking at it from a definition or the perspective of a photographic
Mhm.
motion sequence.
I know about that from Nope.
Yeah, I was about to say, like, they talk about it
Yeah.
in Nope. And Edward Muybridge, he was actually, he is a photographer, or was a photographer, and that's what he specialized in. And then worked a lot with, obviously, that idea of, like, people or animals in motion. So that's what a lot of his photography dealt with. If you're looking at it from the sense of film that's recorded on, like, celluloid, which was a type of film that was used at that time, which kind of everyone knows it by the film, that kind of like vintage little grainy film that people like to put over creepy stuff. But on that one, it's a film called Round Hay Garden Scene, and that one was released in 1888, and that was directed by Louis Le Prince. In Leeds, England, one of the earliest surviving motion pictures. And it just shows like two people walking in a garden, and it only lasted for about 2 seconds. And some people will credit that as the first true movie.
Mhm.
And then if you're looking at it in terms of like a screening, like in the theaters or whatever, the first commercial screening was by the Lumiere brothers when they were debuting their cinematography in 1895 in Paris. And they had a short film that just had workers leaving the Lumiere factory. That's all they filmed.
Oh, were they the ones who did the like going to the moon or something? Like
That's
there's like
what
a
I
short.
thought was the first one.
No, but that's another one that is actually also thought of as like the first film. So the one that you're talking about is called A Trip to the Moon by George Méliès, and that one was released in 1902. And so
and he's
that
the
is-
guy that you had mentioned in our other bonus
Yes.
episode, who the magician guy, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's cool.
And he did a lot more movies, but for some reason, this is the one that I guess in school when you're learning about film history and stuff,
yeah.
they always talk about this film. I'm guessing because of the visuals, obviously. But it's
It was
considered.
when they saw it, they were like, "Oh, okay, this is legit."
Yeah, it's not
It's
just like people
some
walking
guys
in a
with their
park. Yeah.
lunch pails leaving a factory.
Yeah, it's like, oh, we
and
can get
that's a
creative.
really good thing to notice, because I would say this is considered one of the first like narrative films, because it would be
Yeah.
this one
Right.
and then another one called The Execution of Mary Queen of Scots in 1895,
Jeez.
which was 15 seconds long. And that one was by Thomas Edison using like a staged execution, and was considered one of the earliest examples of storytelling. And then like, as a side note,
Characteristically evil event in history for
I
him,
know.
Mr. Edison, to want to. We have this wonderful new technology. Now let's do something evil with it.
there's another one that I had seen too, and I just like the little nugget of information that I got from it. It's called The Great Train Robbery, and it was released in 1903. And this one is also kind of credited as like the first movie ever made. But it's like a debating thing. A lot of people think it's this one,
Yeah.
but because they talk about it in schools. But I think in a general sense, I think A Trip to the Moon is the one who kind of takes the cake for that
Yeah.
kind of title. But for the Great Train Robbery, it's like a Western kind of film. And at the time it was released, it was just a film that symbolized kind of like the turn of the century American life. like social upheaval stuff. And it was about 13 minutes long. It's actually a film that Martin Scorsese reveres a lot, and he pays homage to it in the final scene of Goodfellas. And when I read that, I was like, oh, that's so interesting.
Yeah. What year did you say that came out? Because 13 minutes is such a huge jump from like 15 seconds.
1903.
Okay, gotcha.
So less
like 10
than a
years or so.
decade from
Yeah.
1895. Wow.
But yeah, so it's it depends on what you want to consider a movie, and you can choose. Yeah, you can choose from all of
More complicated than a
those.
simple answer. Well, one of our listeners was also curious. We're going back to silent movies now. Was there dialogue written for silent movies, or how did that work?
Yes. So dialogue was written for silent movies to help create those little like title cards. And also, I mean, even though the audience couldn't hear what was going on, it was something that actors still used when they were acting.
What I was thinking.
And, you know, having to like create whatever the direction that the director wanted. So even though films lacked synchronized sound, they still conveyed complex narratives, and you know, scripts were still a thing at the times, like the dialogue for actors to perform. So like in all the silent movies that we watched, where it would show them still talking, but it wouldn't really tell you, like the little title card wouldn't tell you anything. So the actors obviously knew what was going on, but then whoever was doing the editing, you know, they had to make sure that they would pull out the more key parts and include them in those title cards. So that way the audience would be able to kind of like follow along with what was happening in the performance. I think they're called intertitles is what, the intertitles, or the ones that would communicate the key pieces for the film. And there was also live accompaniment. So films, I think we talked about this in one of the other previous episodes too, where they would have like live bands or musicians, or sometimes even narrators in the screening room, kind of like narrating what was going on.
That's
to
cool.
explain
that job.
Yeah, to explain the scenes. And then there were even times, like what I had read was like sometimes there was even like actors. So there was like live actors performing the dialogue in sync with the film to help with more understanding.
At that point, just go to a play.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, it was
just
kind
go
of
to the
like
theater.
a mixture of both. I think that's pretty neat. I feel like
it's cool.
Something to do again.
I don't remember what movie it was, but it definitely was like early silent films, and there was like a villainous type character, right? They didn't have exact dialogue written, but they were told, you know, you be nefarious, you know, kind of be very aggressive. So the actor just kind of ad-libbed, and apparently there was someone who could like read lips in a theater screening of it, and they essentially flagged the film as having obscene language because they could just tell from, I guess, reading this man's lips that he was saying just some unhinged murderous stuff, and they're like, oh no, this is not not for our consumption.
Yeah, that's
like,
true.
No one else would have known, you know, but yeah, people who can read
what
lips.
a spoiler, that guy.
I was about to get to that, because like with the performance styles, how we had noted before, how they were like very exaggerated, like the actors are sometimes encouraged to improvise dialogue to make things like a little bit more believable and make their performance more authentic. So yeah, I was like, that's
fun.
That's funny though, that they got called out for it.
Yeah, they were like, whoa, this guy is saying some crazy stuff.
Meanwhile, this guy's just like, damn ass. Hell.
Yeah, exactly.
Very tame by modern standards.
But yeah, that was a lot of information. So hopefully it wasn't too boring, because I know sometimes technical stuff can be boring.
I was interested.
Santa, you are our resident technical expert, and I'm just glad you're so good at it, because I'm not.
Yeah. So, yeah, I guess we can move on to our next questions, which are about Hollywood and the Academy. So, first and foremost, a question that has actually been probably asked the most from people who've talked to me. Who is the Academy?
Why, Sarah, I am so glad you asked. And I'm glad we had this opportunity to lay this groundwork because maybe we overestimated our audience a little bit. So we're taking the time for
Not
you
even that.
folks.
Honestly, I'm gonna be honest. Even up to this point, it still has been fuzzy for me. And anytime people
Yeah.
have asked, I've been like, no, honestly, who is the Academy? Like, who is this dark, shady organization? But yeah, Jake, enlighten us.
It's like the High Jedi Council, they like the
Right, right,
mystique,
right.
but I'm here to dispel any of that uncertainty. But the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, which is the organization that created and runs the Academy Awards, or the Oscars, as many of us know them,
Hmm.
started out a very long time ago. And keen listeners will remember that Sarah touched on this very eloquently in our first episode. But essentially, the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences is a trade association. And
What's
so,
that
what a
mean?
trade give me a second. I'm about to get to it. And if you hear any pages turning, it's your own imagination, okay, listeners?
Yeah, definitely not
Um,
consulting notes.
yeah.
We have all of this information in our head.
No, I did learn a lot though by doing this
Cool, that's
research.
good.
And it makes sense in the context of what you were explaining earlier about the impetus for its creation. But
Mm.
as I was starting to say, a trade association is when basically all of the major businesses in a certain industry come together and formulate a formal body where they cooperate on certain topics or problems or concerns that affect them all collectively as an industry. So, some examples of this are like political lobbying
Mm.
or tackling regulations that they either like or don't like, whatever it may be. If they get the sensation that although they're all competing against each other on a day-to-day basis, there's some kind of existential threat or interest for their industry as a whole, their trade association is basically a mechanism for them to cooperate on those topics.
Mm.
So as Sarah mentioned earlier on, in the case of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, I think I'll just start calling it the Academy now. The primary concern the industry was having at that point, and in particular, Louis B. Mayer, our favorite dastardly kingpin, he was very concerned about the prospect of their early industry being infected, he might say, by labor unrest or activism on the part of all these different workers that were rushing out and flooding into Hollywood. Very much in the 20s, it was a period of cracking down on that type of activity. And Mr. Mayer figured that it would be a good idea for all of the studios to get together and kind of create this mechanism in his mind as a way to kind of preempt or, if need be, arbitrate any kind of labor disputes that might come up in the industry. So, for that reason, the Academy actually encompasses not just actors or directors, but also in the beginning, it was actors, directors, producers, technicians, as they say, which I think really encompasses a lot at that point,
Mhm.
and writers. But later on, those major categories will be broken down even further into branches. But in any case, that was the reason for its initial inception. And very interestingly, it did have the opportunity to try to serve that role, to be that labor arbitrage mechanism during the Great Depression in the 1930s. Only problem for the Academy was, as you might expect, they consistently sided with the studios in basically every dispute
What?
that came up, because during that time it was very much the sense that people needed to tighten their belts as there was this economic crisis. So studios were
Mm.
asking their major stars and all their staff and workers to take major pay cuts, and the Academy became kind of discredited because all of the material they were putting out and the actions they were taking were very much pushing that same agenda. So by that point, and soon after, that part of its role sort of fell away. But it started to do other things too. It obviously created the Academy Awards of Merit within a year of its initial creation, which then became the Academy Awards. And it also created a very extensive library of all kind of newspaper clippings, articles, periodicals, books, later digital media, that had anything to do with basically film that they could get their hands on, they started to collect in a central location that all Academy members would have access to. So that was kind of a nice thing, a benefit, a way to kind of keep knowledge alive in the industry. And it grew so rapidly that within the first decade, I think they had to change its location 3 or 4 times because of all the different materials they kept gathering. So, think pre-internet era, all media and information is physical. That was an important role that it played. But that's kind of a broad overview of the Academy.
That definitely makes sense. I think one thing that people have generally wanted to know is like, okay, the Academy as an institution, you've just described to us like what their function was and all of that. And Louis B. Mayer is kind of the creator of these things, but like who else is involved? Is it stars? Is it, directors? And then has that changed over time? Would be kind of the follow-up to that.
Once again, I am so glad that you asked. And this question is totally out of left field. I was not expecting it.
Totally.
No, so when it comes to the actual breakdown of what the Academy itself looks like, as I alluded to a second ago, it has these different branches for each part of the industry. And at the head of each of those branches are governors, they actually call them. So there's a board of governors, and on that board of governors, there's 3 representatives from each of the branches. So in the beginning, there were only 12 on the board of governors because, as I mentioned, there were 4 major branches, and each of them had 3 representatives. Now there are, let me see here, I think it was 57 governors on the board of governors now. The board of governors is very important because the Board of Governors was initially the body that selected the nominees for the awards, but also very importantly, they decide who gets invitations to join the Academy because you have to be invited to join the Academy.
I'm just picturing like an unmarked envelope, showing up at your doorstep or something. But, okay.
Is this This is vaguely threatening, but no, it's a great opportunity. So in the beginning, there were only 230 members of the Academy after their first little clandestine meeting with Louis B. Mayer in a ritzy hotel in LA. So that's relatively small. Now there are 10,500 members of the Academy.
That's insane. Because I was here thinking like 230 already sounds kind of big,
Yeah.
And so
for their auditorium
like
where they met, I'm sure it was cramped.
So now, and I'm sure like with some of the other questions related to the Academy, we'll get into this, but it just feels like Academy membership might not mean quite as much now, or you might not wield as much influence potentially.
Yeah.
How do you even keep track of all those people? Like, oh, we don't want you a part of this anymore, so let's kick you out or something.
Exactly.
Well, the interesting thing now is part of the criteria has been expanded, and I was going to talk a little bit about this, but whereas previously, and still the main thing is that you work in the industry in one of those main categories, you can also be invited to join if you have made some sort of, or are perceived to have made some sort of significant contribution to film or the arts in general. So that's where you start to get, just very public figures, getting invitations to join because they're respected in the media or in culture. And so it really does expand the base of the Academy. Yeah. And then I also wanted to talk about, there's been a gradual expansion of, really participation in our democracy and the economy and public life in general to new groups. And the Academy has really struggled with that at times. And folks may remember back in like 2015, 2016, there was a big online campaign called #OscarsSoWhite, which was started by a corporate finance lawyer turned diversity and inclusion activist named April Rain. She was very frustrated that in 2015 there were very few African American or people of color nominees in any of the major categories. And so she started to raise that hashtag at that point. And then what really caused outrage was the following year in the 2016 Oscars, there were no nominees of non-white background. So that was kind of like April then turned around and said, see what I'm saying? Yeah, so that created, if you remember, it immediately preceding the Me Too movement. It was a time period around Trump's first election that was very kind of activist focused. So the Academy did at that point implement measures and policies to try to expand the actual makeup and breakdown of the Academy. So they have different initiatives that they announced. And I don't think it's any coincidence that in the years since, you've seen movies like Parasite from South Korea win Best Picture, and just in general, a little bit more diversity. But all that to say, you know, in the same way that the United States has struggled over time to reflect its population in an accurate way in terms of its politics and society and culture. That was very similar in the Academy, and it's only very recently that they've started being proactive about that.
Yeah, I still can't like wrap my head around there being like 10,000 plus Academy members, because to me, whenever I would hear, you know, the Academy, I would just think of like, oh yeah, of course the Academy loves that thing, and just characterize them almost to that point, right? Of like this group of old white men, you know,
Right.
judging movies. But I'm like, 10,000 people. And to know obviously that there are diversity issues even within Academy membership is just like, damn, it's 10,000 old white men. That's crazy.
Well, I will
but
say in the
yeah.
beginning, it was very much that like smoke filled old boys
Right.
room, because they
Right.
just basically arbitrarily selected a lot of the movies. I mean, as we know now, because we've watched some of the early years, there were some hits in there, but also
Yeah,
some what's like, why is this nominated? So
yeah. So kind of reverting back to this time period of the late 20s ish, early 30s. I'm not sure if this changed over time or not, but like, how did movies get nominated? That's another question from our audience.
yeah, it certainly did change over time, because in that first year or two, it was just the board of directors, which at that point was only 12 people selecting the nominees. And actually, the side note, the interesting thing was in the first Academy Awards, I don't know if we mentioned this or not, but someone could be nominated for multiple things. So, for instance, Janet Gaynor, who won Best Actress, she wasn't just nominated for one film, she was nominated for three. And that
Right.
got her the Best Actress overall. So that was an interesting tidbit. But when it comes to what it ultimately became, what happens is each of those branches that I mentioned before, say, for example, directors, editors, music, etc. Now it's broken down that far. Each branch is responsible for coming up with a short list of potential nominees for the awards that they oversee. So, for instance, the Best Director Academy Awards, the people who choose the nominees for that are going to be members of the Academy who are directors and are in the Academy because they are directors and were invited to become a part of the Academy.
Gotcha.
So what they do is they look at all the movies that are eligible, which in order to be eligible, you have to have been theatrically released. You can't have been released on TV or some other media, but you have to have been in theaters. And that might be changing now, actually, with Netflix. And I didn't look into that, but that was at least initially the rule. But even in the beginning, each branch had to come up with their short list, and then they would vote on that short list amongst just their branch for the eventual nominees. And so that's how you narrow it down.
Who's in charge of Best Picture then? Because like I think everything else makes direct sense. Best Director, you've got a group of directors. Best Actor, you've got a group of actors. But like Best Picture, who gets to make a short list there?
Sarah, that is what makes Best Picture so special, and why I think it was the best thing for us to orient our podcast around. Because Best Picture is something that everyone gets to vote on from the very beginning.
Oh.
So it's kind of like, you know, with every election cycle, everybody comes out for the presidential election because it's something that everybody views as like super important. It's kind of the same way with Best Picture in the Academy. You might say, oh, I didn't watch the technical awards, or I'm going to go get popcorn while they're giving out the editing awards. But everybody's in their seats for the Best Picture. And that's because everyone gets a say in it. So that process that I was just mentioning, that's branch specific in the preliminary rounds, it's different for the Best Picture. Everyone gets to vote on that regardless of their branch. And so there are many that say that the Best Picture is kind of the most reflective of where the Academy is overall. Because otherwise there's these different kind of blocks. You know, the actors are viewed as a very important voting block because they're the largest when it comes to the actual awards. but Best Picture, like I said, sort of transcends a lot of those distinctions.
Dang. Well, so I basically learned through this that the way that I was thinking about it in my head was in many ways opposite of what was actually going on, because I was expecting like Best Picture would be some like nefarious, insidious, like, okay, those branches are, to kind of keep those different groups happy to vote for the movies in their category, but Best Picture is going to come down to the like studio execs or something, so it's
Right.
kind of a pleasant surprise. That's like, oh no, everyone gets a say. So I guess I was
Well, and like I said,
wrong.
not that way in the very beginning, but
Right.
gradually, once the Academy Awards of Merit were introduced, and these processes were put in place, the impetus was for it to become meritocratic. So definitely a transition there.
I feel like I now have a much clearer understanding of how the Academy is structured. And now when people ask me this, if they don't listen to this bonus episode, one, I can
Which
tell
they
them to
will.
listen to the bonus episode. Yeah. And two, if for whatever reason they refuse to, I feel like I
$3,
can
people.
explain it. I know, right? Like
With
come on.
inflation, that's like
Yeah.
a quarter.
Yeah, exactly. What is that? A pack of gum these
Yeah.
days?
What could a banana cost, Michael? $10?
Exactly. One day that's going to be true. But okay, awesome. Well, thank you for that information about the Academy. Like I said, I feel much more equipped to discuss who they are.
Well, I guess then we can move on to our next questions. And our lovely Sarah,
That's
our very
me.
articulate Sarah, is going to take, I guess, the responsibility of answering. So the first question, and I'm pretty sure it's one that a lot of people wonder about because we've mentioned it a lot,
Yeah.
is what is the Hays Code?
All right, you have set me up. Now I feel like I need to overperform in this case. But no, yeah. So the Hays Code, we've definitely mentioned it. What it was essentially just a set of moral guidelines for movies. So it was formally introduced in 1930, which is around where we are now, but it didn't become strictly enforced until 1934. Right now, we're technically in an era known as the pre-Hays Code. So when we reference it, usually we are already anticipating this change in movies that we're expecting to see moving forward. But right now, things are still exciting. Things are still, all over the place in terms of what sorts of narratives and stuff are being allowed, what's getting released. So the brief history of it was actually created in response to public outcry over like perceived immorality in film. And there was some high profile scandals that were going on in Hollywood at the time. So that strengthened audience concerns, particularly from religious groups that were organizing various boycotts, which affected, profitability for films, led to various censorship boards becoming more aggressive about what could and couldn't be displayed, which led to banks becoming more reluctant to finance films since they might get censored or boycotted and they wouldn't make their money back. So there was growing financial pressure. Everyone really was just trying to protect their bottom line. There was also political pressure as well. So states in the meantime, while Hollywood was kind of dragging their feet, were creating their own censorship boards, and politicians were getting to have a grand old time using Hollywood as like a campaigning issue, pointing to the excesses of stardom and the alcoholism and drug, like all of these things that polite society liked to ignore at the time. Congress was literally just getting ready to intervene and roll out, rules that the industry had to follow. So eventually that's why the Hays Code came out, so that they could at least self-regulate and it wouldn't be like federally mandated or state mandated. The main rules that movies then had to follow, I'm just going to read them out, and some of these I think are worse than others. So no profanity, no nudity or suggestive dancing, no portrayal of illegal drug use, no depiction of interracial relationships. Yeah, big yikes. Crime cannot be portrayed in a sympathetic light. Marriage and home life had to be respected. No graphic violence. Religious institutions had to be portrayed respectfully. And good always has to triumph over evil.
Oh God.
So
Really narrowing the
Yeah.
field. here.
Yes, exactly. It really hemmed filmmakers into just like this very specific type of narrative, sanitized the content of a medium that just had such potential to really broaden people's perspectives and reflect life as it was, with all of the beauty and ugliness, right? Like, to me as a viewer, I think both of those things are really important in storytelling and getting to resonate with all of that. So yeah, just really, really narrowed down what people got to watch, what people got to create. And I found out also that one of the requirements within that, so it wasn't specified as one of those main rules, but it was like a subcategory, so to speak. And that was that revenge couldn't be justified as a plot point. And I feel like that's kind of why we see, we see such a surge of revenge films. I feel like once the Hays Code goes away in the late
That's
60s.
true.
And it's because, it's revenge is such a powerful motivator in storytelling throughout history, right? Like, it's just,
Yeah.
I don't know, it appeals to a lot of, I think, the baser nature when you've been wronged or whatever else. It just creates these really strong narratives. But yeah, that was one thing that was also not allowed in the Hays Code. So what happens if the Hays Code isn't followed? Violations basically would result in $25,000 in fines for studios. And that's like $450,000 in today's money.
Mm.
I kind of feel like that in some ways enabled big studios to choose when they wanted to push boundaries or not. Because at that point, it's just like a cost of doing business, right? Of like, oops,
Right.
we violated this. Here's 25,000, but now it's this movie that is noteworthy within the audience of like pushing these boundaries and being different, versus smaller studios. You can't afford to do that, right? So you're just
Like a
having to create.
too big to fail thing. Like the
Yeah.
big company can skirt regulations because what are you going to do? Find me a couple $1 million? We just made $3 billion, you know?
Exactly. So I'm kind of gonna be just personally on the lookout for things like that as we go through the years where the Hays Code really kicks in, to see like, okay, which of these movies ignored some of these rules that had been laid out. But in general, movies, like, they needed to get their scripts approved before filming, and then they had to get a certificate of approval before they could actually release it to theaters nationwide. And that was true of foreign films as well. Like, if they wanted to release in America, they had to comply to the Hays Code and get that same sort of certificate of approval, which, again, kind of crazy, when you think about it, but it was really just born out of a lot of public outcry, and then banks and other institutions being worried that they wouldn't make their money back if things were getting boycotted. So the impact, though, other than just limiting the types of movies that come out during that time, filmmakers obviously got creative, right? So they created workarounds, a lot of use of double entendres. They created a lot of conventions that we are familiar with today. Like, if there's going to be an intimate scene, we fade to black, leaving a lot to suggestion, visual metaphors, things that kind of create that distinct classic Hollywood style were just ways for them to try and still tell the story they wanted to tell or make the points that they wanted to make without overtly showing or saying certain things. So kind of subtly putting as much as they could in there. Fun fact, I also found out through that a lot of the fast-paced dialogue that we've talked about a little bit that we're starting to see in this kind of talkie era was also a mechanism to slip things past censors, because it's like, oh, if the dialogue is going too fast and they can't really hear everything that they're saying, then they're not going to catch all the things that they want to say, So I thought that was really cute that well, I don't know if cute is the right word, but
Clever.
that
Makes sense.
Yeah.
It just goes to show you, well, where there's a will, there's a way. And when it comes to human creativity, the urge is going to be there, and
Right.
you can't stifle those really primordial urges to see, romance and violence, even, unfortunately, but also, you can't deny it.
or
There's these things that are stimulating
revenge.
to us.
Yeah,
It makes
absolutely.
me think about like some of the movies we've already seen, and it makes me think, like, because one of the things that we've noted a lot is like how sometimes if a woman gets slighted in a film, how she usually takes it really well and she doesn't get like all overly dramatic or whatever, like how we see a lot like now in a lot of movies now, where it's kind of like sometimes they'll take the petty route. And
Yeah.
even though that adds a good twist, like, okay, taking the high road, where even like them kind of just moving on with their life, or even helping the other woman and stuff like that, it makes me wonder, like, was that always intentional, or was it just for the sake of kind of like appealing to these roles, or kind of like making it a little bit more digestible for the audience?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really
stiff
good
upper lip, ladies.
I feel like a really good question, because I feel like we have yet to see the big change take place, but during this time, boycotting and public outcry and studio pressure was already a thing, right? So I'm sure to some extent what you're talking about, even if it wasn't an enforced rule yet, there might have been concessions being made or choices being made in these movies and the way that they're written, right? To be like, okay, let's try to not upset the group that we upset last time with the movie that we made, you know, just trying to make those decisions in advance. But eventually, you know, didn't really matter, since they had to do that. And I know there was a lot of a pushback, obviously, from writers, from directors, from actors, from everyone, because it's just, as we've talked, it's stifling creativity, right? So there were people who still tried to intentionally make movies that push the boundaries, or at least directly oppose these sorts of things. Like, I found a quote from Ben Hecht, and he's the writer from The Front Page, which we've watched, and also the original Scarface, which I don't think that was nominated, but obviously has to do with gang violence, etc. So what he said about the Hays Code was that, quote, it's like writing with a tourniquet around your brain. And Charlie Chaplin essentially said they're trying to make pictures for children, you know? So it's like, yeah, people were upset. But even with all of that, it defined movies through the 50s and into the 60s. It wasn't completely dismantled until 1968, which was when the MPAA rating system, like PG, PG-13, that whole system, that took its place as a way for audience members to know what kind of content was going to be in movies going into it. But yeah, ultimately, the Hays Code, 1934 was when it started getting fully enforced, all the way through 1968. So that's a huge chunk of time, and it had an unimaginable impact on movies. And I'm excited to see the post Hays Code era and see how things everyone gets really creative again right after that.
I'm curious to see when we get into like more of like the enforcement of the Hays Code, just to see like the differences, and see, are movies really that I don't want to say dumbed down, but I guess you know, more quote unquote digestible, and then seeing kind of like the rebelliousness that happens right after, when that gets lifted and people aren't like, or directors and writers aren't having to limit themselves in that way anymore. So that's going to be very interesting to see.
Yeah, no, definitely. Because I know, like, Jake, you've mentioned some of that like 70s-ish anti-hero era, and maybe this is getting into a question that we have from one of our listeners, but yeah, like Taxi Driver could never have been made during the Hays Code period, you know? So yeah, definitely interested to see how obvious it is, for sure.
I just wanted to mention, to help contextualize that great overview you just gave, Sarah, of what the Hays Code is, that this is taking place in a time period where these kinds of paternalistic attitudes towards the public are very common. There's a movement really in the 20s related to a gentleman named Edward Bernays, who is sort of the grandfather of mass marketing and advertising. And there was this sensation among, you know, captains of industry, government planners, even kind of the who's who and the power elite, that public opinion could be shaped, human behavior could be predicted and directed. And it was just a matter of striking the right balance. And in so doing, and kind of in the most idealistic reading of that, to create a better, more moral, more well-run society. And so it's related to things like prohibition, like I said, related to advertising, and also really related to Sigmund Freud. This is around the time where discussions of human psychology and group thought processes and whatnot are becoming things that, like I said, people in power are taking note of and thinking, number one, is this something we can profit off of? But number two, how can we utilize some of these new insights to better manage society in their minds? So I feel like the Hays Code is in
Mm-hmm.
that tradition, especially when you think about the time period.
Yes. And kind of what I was reading, the reason also that it really started getting reinforced within the early 30s into the mid 30s versus somewhat ignored, for the first couple of years, had a lot to do with shifting perspective on how society should kind of act during like the Great Depression, right? The Great Depression was this huge shift in now we learned our lesson in some ways, so to speak, from the excesses of the Roaring 20s. And maybe this is in some twisted way like a punishment for the way that we were all behaving for the last couple of decades. And so the 30s, you had more of that, I feel like, rise in that type of thinking, right? Like, let's return to this very like strict, wholesome image in, yeah, almost like a balance to that sort of thing. So that, led to just a lot more boycotts and a lot more public outcry for
Like
censorship.
me, that old retrograde saying, good times create soft men, hard times create
Yeah.
good men. I think that was what they were trying to do.
Yeah,
Oh, God.
exactly. Yes.
With that being said, and on the topic of just marketing and like having appeal to audiences and stuff like that, what would you say is the most expensive movie that had been made up until this time? And did it succeed or did it fail?
So, this was actually a movie that had come up in like a documentary that we watched about that transition from like early Hollywood into talkies and stuff. So it was Ben-Hur, A Tale of the Christ, made in 1925. This one was easier to find. So we're only looking up to 1930, right? Like this era that we're in, just so we can maybe keep this sort of question alive. Yeah, Ben-Hur, A Tale of the Christ, 1925, was the most expensive film made up until 1930. So it had a budget of approximately $3.9 million, which is around 70 million in 2024 money. So it was just an absolutely massive movie. It was a huge
Yeah.
undertaking for MGM Studios. It had huge sets, thousands of extras, and a lot of really elaborate chariot race sequences that were revolutionary for the time. So the cost was completely unprecedented, and it set a record that would stand for just years after that. It literally nearly bankrupted MGM because MGM had only become a studio formally in 1924. So this was essentially less than a year after that this was released. But it was successful, and it took some time to earn all of the money back, obviously, because it was very, very costly to make. But its success is what helped establish MGM as a major studio. I did also look up some trivia just about the movie because I was curious. So no one really asked about movie trivia, but I'm going to give it anyway.
Do it.
Do it.
Excellent. Okay. So I mentioned, they had these big chariot race sequences. So pretty much this one, I guess, is a little bit of not fun trivia first, but speaks a lot
feel like
to
this isn't
safety
gonna go well.
regulations. Yeah. Safety regulations in the industry were non-existent at this time. So there were cases of, several horses that were injured or killed, and at least one stuntman died during filming, and that led to some of the first safety guidelines for animals and people in Hollywood. So at least something kind of came out of it, but we know that there still were plenty of accidents in early Hollywood since then. But that's kind of one of like the main unfortunate trivia points, but there were some fun trivia points as well. So it was actually one of the first movies to use the new Technicolor process, which we saw later in the Hollywood Review, which we try to forget. But what they did was they only used it for select sequences. So any scene that depicted Jesus were in color, and the rest of the film was in black and white. So it helped add to this kind of feeling of awe, of otherworldliness. So they were kind of getting creative with
Cool,
all
actually.
of that. Yeah, it is pretty cool. And it honestly, it made me really interested to watch this movie because it sounds like the scale of it is just unlike basically anything that we've seen so far in movies. Wings might get kind of close to that, but having this be even earlier and even more massive, I'm really curious about it. There's also a battle sequence at sea in this movie, which again, I'm like, what is the plot of this movie?
Just
what is,
make it
there's
as
so much
epic as
happening.
possible.
Yes, they're hitting all of the notes. But in that battle sequence of sea, they used real sized ships, but they specially constructed a lake. But the ships were, again, like life size, and they actually set one of them on fire for the scene. So again, practical effects, just really massive
Hate
work.
to have been the extra that screwed that shot up,
I know.
Yeah.
You're on your cell phone in the background.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, so that was kind of the main trivia. There was also, and this again kind of speaks to, even though this was pre-Hays Code, just the awareness of what like American audiences were okay with versus European audiences, where standards were a little different. But they had several scenes with nudity in them, and so the European markets got the scenes where people were unclothed, so to speak, but they reshot those scenes for American audiences where they were wearing clothes. So there was already this kind of awareness of Americans have maybe more like Puritan standards, right? More
I've
prudish.
always been a
in a lot of
European
ways.
at heart. That's what I feel.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I'm definitely very curious about this movie. And it actually is what helped establish the concept of prestige pictures. I don't know if you guys have
Ooh.
heard that term. But it's kind of the first time I've run across it, but I think we're all aware of the concept, which is just that like extremely high budget film that theaters can charge premium ticket prices for, and they'll stay in theaters for much longer, right? Because there's just such demand for that. So this was the first movie to do that.
Oh,
Like
wow.
Marvel movies now.
Yeah, I've always
Yeah.
wondered about that. Like why some movies would stay in theaters longer than others.
Mhm.
Obviously, like, demand and stuff. But
Right.
yeah,
right.
I was not aware of that term, to be honest. So that's pretty cool.
Yep.
So in the early days, our prestige pictures were about Jesus. Now
Yeah.
they're about
Iron
Batman.
Man. Yeah.
So with all that wonderful information, what was the cheapest movie ever made?
Okay, so this one obviously is much harder to answer because
They were all
there
cheap.
are so one, they were all cheap, and two, and this is true today, but even looking just up till 1930, there are so many movies made that are made on just like extremely low budgets, like the cost of the camera, and sometimes you don't even pay your people. So what I chose to look at, just because by nature we can't really know truly, what the cheapest movies were that were made. I kind of just looked at movies that were either commercially successful or produced by larger studios, but still, didn't cost a lot to make. So
Makes
I guess
sense.
for this question, what seemed to best fit was Charlie Chaplin's first movie, which was Making a Living, and that came out in 1914. So it was made for Keystone Studios, which probably none of us have heard of because they just were not super relevant by the time we started this project. But reportedly, it cost just a few $100s to make. And Keystone was known for making comedies in bulk. They were very, very cheap to make. They would film in one day usually, and they would just kind of mass produce these comedies. But it is how Charlie Chaplin got his start. And even though he wasn't the main character, it showcased a lot of like his trademark physical comedy, which propelled him to stardom after that. But it was only 15 minutes long. And, box office records and stuff weren't as closely followed or recorded as they are now. But it led to Charlie Chaplin getting more roles at Keystone. So we can kind of assume that it did well enough for it to be considered successful to keep him on board and have him start starring in some of their comedies. So yeah, I would say is probably the cheapest, quote unquote movie that was at least relevant to the time. Only cost a few $100s. And yeah.
So a real testament to the importance of low budget picture making,
Yeah.
even that early on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Charlie Chaplin allegedly, well, not allegedly, because he wrote in his autobiography, so definitively disliked his performance in this movie and thought that he was awful in it. So we are all our
That's-
own worst critics.
It's just
You
an
know?
actor thing, They always say
Yeah.
that.
So yeah.
Well, heck, that was very enlightening. Mostly, I'm thankful to our listeners for having, the intuition to ask such spot on questions, because I learned a heck of a lot from you guys just in talking about this and also from the research that I did. But
Yeah,
before we leave
same.
here, we have kind of a little bit of a more fun or unique category that doesn't fall into some of the other topics we mentioned. Um, what is, and this is kind of an open ended question, so I think we could take it in different directions, but someone was curious about what each of our three favorite eras of movies are.
Talking like Taylor Swift eras.
I don't know what that means.
Neither do I. I don't even. I'm not even a Swiftie.
All
but
three of us are just like, ha ha ha. We don't get it though.
I'm not
That
even
is a
Swiftie,
singer.
but I hear eras
I
all
think
the
that's
time.
the name of her an album,
Yeah.
maybe, or a tour. I'm not
Or
sure.
something. It was a stupid joke.
Oh, it was that our Zoomer listeners, all two of them, will love that one.
We just lost like those
No,
listeners.
no, okay. So actually, the person who asked this question will love that answer, though.
Oh, I think I know where you're getting at. Yeah. Okay.
So I was thinking about this one a lot, and it's so hard because with this podcast, like starting from the beginning and then having to work our way up, it's so hard because usually when like with questions like this, I like to look at everything, and obviously I haven't seen every single
Right.
era of movie. So at the moment, I'll say probably like 60s I did enjoy a lot. Like I was a really big Elizabeth Taylor, Audrey Hepburn, and just watched a lot of those kinds of movies. They're lighthearted, Humphrey Bogart and all that kind of stuff. Very classical romance kind of stuff. And then obviously like it's not an era, but I guess like even in the 60s, like the horror movies and that came out, Night of the Living Dead, kind of rocketing zombie movies and stuff. I would say like maybe 80s horror maybe would be like my favorite kind of era in the 80s. Maybe even some of the action because it was kind of goofy and funny.
Yeah, people were wilding out and having fun in the 80s.
Yeah. And then I don't know, maybe like I wouldn't say like 2010s because I feel like at that point, like everything was kind of shot in that weird, either like, I don't know, it was like a cool kind of filter where everything was like dark or like very kind of like a blue, like, you're watching a film from like the 2010s.
Know exactly what you mean.
Yeah, because it has that filter. I don't know. It's just, those are kind of like fun to make fun of, I guess. I had never seen that movie Wanted. And I remember when it came out when I was in high school, everyone was talking about like, I don't know how good it was or how cool it was. And then I watched it, I don't know, like 2 months ago, and I was like, wow, this is kind of garbage, but
was that the Angelina Jolie one?
Yeah, where they curved the bullet.
Oh, okay, yeah.
I remember
Yeah.
seeing that. Yeah.
Yeah, you had to like suspend your disbelief or your belief a lot or whatever.
I remember thinking it was cool when I was like 17 or whatever year it came out.
But yeah, so I don't know, maybe 2010 era movies, but it just depended because I don't know. I do like to hate watch movies, so
yeah, that's
you're
fun
not just
in
talking
its own
about
way.
merit here. Yeah, you're talking about your particular proclivity.
Enjoyment.
Yes,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
okay.
I'm pretty sure they'll change now that we're going through this whole journey of watching every single. I mean, it's just limited to Oscars and nominees and stuff, but I still feel like you get a good taste of what was around at the time or what was being released. And what I'm also curious about too is as we progress with this podcast is just seeing like patterns. Cause even like growing up watching a lot of movies, sometimes you would just see like waves of stuff. Like I remember just seeing waves of like zombie movies or zombie shows. There was waves of like action film or even like with fantasy. So I want to see like the patterns because I like patterns. So I'm curious to see that.
Yeah, definitely.
But I would say favorite era, definitely like the 60s. I think I would have to say, because I always go back and rewatch some of those movies that were released at that time. They're kind of like my comfort movies.
Yeah, that's fair.
Nice, very classy.
So similar to you, Chrysantha, I feel like this answer might change as I learn more about distinct kind of periods or eras of film as we go through it chronologically, but at least now, and I don't know how much this will fully change because I think a lot of it is rooted in nostalgia. I have to go with the 90s, which
Oh, that's such a good one.
it's
Yeah.
just because there's so many, like, there are a lot of good movies that came out during this time, like good dramas, good, I mean, movies with the word good in it. You got Goodfellas, Good Will Hunting. You know?
That's good marketing.
Yeah, that is good marketing. But you also have, like, I don't know, just a lot of fun like you have Clueless, right? You have all of these rom-coms that kind of come out during this time. 10 Things I Hate About You, things that are just fun and enjoying film, while you also have things that are very serious, very dramatic, you know, Saving Private Ryan, Silence of the Lambs, Schindler's List. But then you also have, and I don't know if other eras really did this in the same way, because Chrysantha, you mentioned kind of the 80s-ish with the rise of zombie movies. I feel like 90s was like disaster movies, right? You had Independence Day and Twister and Armageddon. Yeah. So all of those, I don't know, there's just such a wide variety of genres, and in every genre there's either something that's like really fun or really memorable or really fun to make fun of. And then you also have just kind of from like an animated standpoint, especially because I was a kid during this time, the like golden era of Disney movies and stuff too. So yeah, I think I just really love that decade because it's really fun. It's kind of like there's truly something for everyone. Even with like sci-fi, you have like all the way from Total Recall to like Contact, or you have The Truman Show. Like you've got so many good things. So I'm gonna go with the 90s.
I was gonna say that too, but I was like, I don't know.
You're like, is it biased?
Yeah, because that was like the era that we grew up in. So I was like, maybe I'll challenge myself and think outside that box. But I am a really big fan of the 90s era too.
Yes, I did the same thing. And I was going to say, I think probably from like a film critic perspective, maybe something like the 60s or 70s, you're going to see more like change in a way that was, I'll call it like revolutionary, right? Because it was such a break from the norm, and the 80s and 90s kind of got to take advantage of that, right? Because by this point it's like, cool, audiences have been like softened up, so now we can go in all sorts of different directions. But I just love it. I don't know. I'm looking at a list of 90s movies now, and there's like Galaxy Quest, Wayne's World, like
good
Ever
ones.
After.
Yeah,
it's a great era for movies.
that is true. Yeah. Damn, I changed my answer.
I've convinced one.
No, I'm so relieved that you selected that era, because in my mind I was looking at this question in two veins, right? What's the kind of academic answer versus my own personal feelings of nostalgia and whatnot? And a lot of what you just said parallels my own feelings about that era. And in particular, I'm so glad you touched on that disaster movie aspect, because a number of years ago I was watching a documentary by a British documentarian I really enjoy called Adam Curtis. I think it was the film Hypernormalization, where he points out that in like the 5 to 6 years leading up to September 11th, there were a series of films totally seemingly disconnected from each other who kind of were portraying like a city being destroyed in very similar ways that ultimately looked very similar to that. And I'm not saying that in a conspiratorial way or anything, but it was almost like the 90s was such this period of American splendor, right? It's called the end of history in politics studies in many ways, a term coined by Francis Fukuyama. But it was this feeling like, okay, we're at the end. What's the next frontier? And it's like that human need for like almost like a death drive. It's like, this can't be it. We have to have some kind of reckoning, or, there's some kind of threat. And so we were imagining all of these really epic and existential attacks. And for me, Independence Day is kind of that very early memory. I remember I had the VHS box with the holographic cover where it was the White House, and if you turned it in a different way, the White House was
Oh,
exploding.
I remember those.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
holographic covers that you like
Mhm.
tilt and it's like, oh, one picture from a certain angle. Man,
You remember the
that is one thing
Disney
that we're missing out on
VHS
physical
boxes that you
media.
could like chuck at each other because they were so sturdy?
So heavy. Yeah. So, yeah.
But so I'm really glad you said that. But now that I did that disclaimer, I have to give the academic answer, which is the true answer in my heart as well, that I've mentioned on the podcast before. And it was really this new Hollywood era. That is to say, as the studios were facing competition from television in the 50s and the 60s, they became a little bit less profitable, and they relinquished a little bit of their control. As you said before, the Hays Code really fully came down. And this, most importantly, this new generation of creatives was coming out of film school, which was sort of a new concept at that point. The generation of Scorsese and Lucas and Coppola and so many others, De Palma, etc., really getting out there and seizing on a moment in American history that is so interesting, because you had this explosion of angst and unrest at the end of the 60s with the counterculture. Then you had the obviously the frustration over the Vietnam War and the feeling that this whole generation had almost been betrayed or sacrificed for reasons nobody really understood, broadly speaking. And then cap it all off with, at that time, not as unprecedented now, but for the time, the Nixon Watergate scandal really harmed a lot of people's trust in institutions and the government. So the whole decade of the 70s is really viewed in a lot of ways as a period of crisis, a period of uncertainty in terms of formerly concrete norms and assumptions being broken down in real time. And I think it allowed for a lot of creative-minded people to seize on that moment and explore film in a new way. And I think that's a big part of why one of my favorite things to do, if you're on like film Twitter or other areas, is to just look at newspaper clippings of what films were running in a certain week or month, back in the day. So say if you open up, July 1974, and you'll see maybe it's 12 movies that are playing at a theater. And it's like you look down the list and everyone is an absolute banger. It's like if you were in modern day, any one of the movies that was playing at that time would be the best movie of the year this year. So it's interesting to look back at that period. I oftentimes wonder, do they know what they were in the middle of? My great aunt and uncle, hey, Twinkie and Mikey, I hope you're listening. They talk about they would go to the theater on a regular basis, and they're still big film buffs. But man, what a time to be in your 20s or your 30s, and to be right in the middle of that time period, because I think we take it for granted now, and it's kind of regressed in a lot of ways. But you gotta, when you ask that question to me, it's got to be that 1968 through 82 period. Unfortunately, a movie called Heaven's Gate was kind of like was like a blockbuster art picture that failed epically, and after that the studios clamped down again. But that would be my answer.
But have you considered American Pie?
Well, the song kind of
peak 90s. Yeah, no. Yeah.
No, I mean, that's American
that's
Pie is kind of the Citizen
answer.
Kane of our era, I guess.
100%. It's so revolutionary.
I've never looked at a pie the same way since.
Oh no. Yeah, and I think that is, I know.
Poor father.
For everyone that had to.
Oh God.
I think that is definitely a good answer. I think it's interesting that you can look at so many eras. I will say, as you've said, because of like studio control and everything, I feel like now it's kind of like we have maybe a handful of good, maybe even a handful is generous. Like summer blockbusters, there's usually one or two, right, that are worth going to see. And then apart from that, it's kind of towards the end of the year when movies are trying to get into theaters to qualify for the Oscars, where the good movies are. But the rest of the year, it's just kind of, I don't know. I don't go to the movies nearly as often anymore.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
I
don't know
feel that.
how much of that is just stress and work and life, and it's just,
Right.
but it does feel like there's a dip in quality as
Yeah, I
well.
don't know. There's just so many
Yeah.
sequels and remakes and
Yes.
everything, you know? But yeah, a lot of good questions from our audience, and I feel like some of these we can continue to track for future Q&A episodes, like what's the most expensive, what's the cheapest. This will be a recurring segment, definitely. So if you are listening along and you end up having questions, feel free to reach out to us on any of our socials, or you can email your questions to lightscameraaccolade@gmail.com. We love getting questions from people. These really allow us to deep dive and just spend some time learning and researching and just having as much fun with it as possible. So thank you again for the questions submitted this time. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and we'll see you next week for our regularly scheduled programming.